Hello YouTube. Let's look today at a very interesting paranormal phenomenon. It has been known for a long time that there are human doubles. This phenomenon has different names for different people. The description of the energy double is ubiquitous in mystical literature. This phenomenon is reflected in myths and legends. There are even special practices for creating the so-called double or a second. This is increasingly covered with a layer of absurdities and implausible fantasies. But there seems to be something unified in them, and we cannot just discard the idea. The ancient Egyptians, for example, believed in the Ka, the second soul of man endowed with special powers and knowledge. The occultists claimed that the priests then possessed a well-developed method of invoking Ka, and it was one of the most intimate secrets of ancient Egyptian magic. Quite eloquent information about the distinguished ghost can be found also in the Taoists and in the Sufis' writings. Indian texts devoted to yoga often report that as a result of certain meditative practices, a yogi can acquire the ability to be in two places at the same time, and cite various legends about this. Hindu secret teachings, which have been around for many centuries, assert that man is a complex being consisting of several bodies. And besides the physical, or as it was also called, the crude body, there are at least three more. One of them is the etheric body. It is a duplicate of the physical and is like its energetic counterpart. The other, the astral body, is the abode of sensitivity, imagination, and passions. It thinks, but more sensually than rationally. Thanks to this body, such controversial phenomena as telepathy and dreams are carried out. The astral body can leave the physical and etheric shells, which are inextricably linked and travel separately. And the last, more subtle one is the body of thought, the mind. This is what we called the world soul. Chaldean magicians mention two souls, the higher intelligent and the lower sensual. They believe that these souls united appear in the form of various ghosts and animal likenesses. The Greeks also believed that there are two souls, intelligent and sensual. They called it astroede and believed that it could be in the form of a phantom or a ghost. Now, the Komi ethnicity in Russia called them ort, which means shadow soul, an invisible double of a person who is with that person from birth to death. This word can literally be translated as behind a person's back, behind the left shoulder. But ort can appear to a person only in exceptional cases, as a rule, on the eve of death. If a person is destined to die from a gunshot wound, the appearance of an ort is accompanied by the sound of a shot. According to the circumstances of the appearance, it is possible to judge what kind of death it would be. As a rule, the visible ort in front of people is doing the same as its counterpart. If the ort does not have a head during this, death is considered inevitable. While it is not entirely clear how to find out that the double is yours, the person who is trying to find the answer. If the ghost fully corresponds to the appearance of a person, his double has a chance to avoid death if he can orient himself correctly. The contact of the original with the double often ends with the fact that the double disappears and the person himself or herself is subjected to some strong influence. Therefore, it is dangerous to get close to the double. In addition to those doppelgangers who appear in moments of fatal danger, there are cases of artificial creation of human energy copies. In the magical practice of Tibet, there is a technique for creating both material doubles and some entities consisting of energy plasma. They are called Tulpa. It looks like a human. Its behavior and actions are identical to human ones. But this being, as soon as the level of vitality becomes sufficient for its independent existence, seeks to free itself from connection with the consciousness of the Creator man and from self-control. In the legends of Tibetan magicians, there are cases when a tulpa, sent with a specific purpose or mission, did not return and began an independent existence. The same thing happened when its creator suddenly died before he could destroy the tulpa. In Europe, the doubles are known as doppelgangers. The word doppelganger came from German, literally meaning double visitor. And I'm sure probably I mispronounce it, but excuse me, this is the word that's being used to describe this. Someone who goes just like you and does everything just like you. There are many different types of doppelganger, since the definition of the word has become quite loose to describe different phantom doubles. Doppelganger can be ghostly or appear in the flesh. It can be an evil twin that causes harm, embarrass friends and relatives of the prototype person. The Europeans heard so much about wandering in the etheric body that in the end they even tried to investigate this phenomenon scientifically. It is known that D'Urville at the beginning of the last century put a lot of experiments with astral doubles, as he told the world in his famous book The Ghost of the Living. Using hypnosis to induce a trance, this experimenter produced a split of the subjects and observed quite material effects of the presence of a double. According to his reports, the ghost was able to open and close the closet door, press the electric bell button, and balance the scales. However, skeptics then published all sorts of refutations of his experiments, and the sensation imperceptibly evaporated. Carlos Castaneda wrote in the most detail about the double in his books, about his training with the Indian shaman Don Juan. The ancient magicians called it the second, and the Toltecs considered it the center of their own power. After all, the power manifested itself through the second in reality, without any trances and dreams, and therefore called him a Nagual. With the help of dream practice, it is possible to form an energy body, or as it also called a dream body. The second can violate physical laws by his presence alone. After all, his activity denies the picture of the world we're used to, which once again indicates our virtuality. The double of Don Juan can fly like a kite. The double of Don Gennaro can walk along the trunks of eucalyptus trees, but in both cases the observer will experience strange experiences of dreamlike and general uncertainty about what is perceived. Now, a scientist by the last name of Xen Zhuk, who devoted many years to the study and practice of Castaneda's legacy, wrote down this. And what is much worse, a movie camera or a camera will behave in the same insecure way. We will not be able to get objective evidence, which means we will never prove to an outsider that we observed something less trivial than a hallucination. However, the film can show something amazing and incomprehensible: lights, glowing spots, glare in places where there can be no glare, unexplained defects in optics, even ball lightning. You can explore the microstructure of a photo or a film material. It will turn out that it has been destroyed, has been exposed to radiation of an unclear nature. In a word, something is fixed, but it is not possible to identify this something. In general, it should be noted that the connection between the photo image and the psychoenergetic state of the film subject is the most direct. In a train stalker, so to say, the second is partially separated from the first. This creates a number of visual effects that are invisible to the eye but are fixed by the film. It seems as if the person being photographed is surrounded by a halo of indistinct light. Most often the glare falls on the face and upper chest. All these light phenomena are easily explicable and therefore are not displaced by our perceptual attention. There are situations that are much stranger. They serve as a reason for sensational articles in tabloid magazines. These are rare cases when the second body, double, due to a surge of energy, exchange activity, separates from the main cocoon, physical body, and manages to get into the frame. Then an extraordinary thing happens. Something like a ghost appears near the person being photographed. Often such pictures are fake, but we're not talking about such cases. Perhaps the most impressive intrusion of dreaming in Don Juan's magical practice seems to be teleportation and the appearance of a magician in different places at the same time. For example, Castaneda tells how one day he was inexplicably transported from Mexico to the United States and found himself at the house of a Nagual woman. Although only a few moments ago, before entering the state of dreaming, he was talking with Don Juan, sitting on a bench in a small town hundreds of miles away from this place. The compaction of the second body sooner or later leads to the fact that this form begins to have a noticeable effect on all living observers. In other words, it is perceived as a really existing organism. From the side of a living observer, such a dense second body would be perceived as a double or a double of another person with all the features inherent in this perception, instability and accessibility only in the altered states of consciousness of the observer, etc. So, according to Belarus researchers who are quite knowledgeable in the subject, there is a similarity with the double of a comatose vampire. Now I want to tell you about unusual encounters in history with doppelgangers. Let's start with Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. The famous German writer Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who lived between 1749 and 1832, was a poet and politician who made a huge contribution to the development of literature. His words were listened to, his opinion was respected. One day Goethe, in a depressed state, after a quarrel with a girl named Frederica, was driving along the path. Unexpectedly, he ran into a mysterious man who was riding towards him. According to Goethe, he saw this man not with his eyes, but with mind's eye, as he were himself, although Johann Wolfgang and the man were dressed in different clothes. The figure soon disappeared, and Goethe, who found the sight of the mysterious traveler strangely soothing, forgot about what had happened. 8 years later, he again drove along the same path in the opposite direction to see Frederica again. It was then that he realized that he was wearing exactly the same clothes as his double 8 years ago. This was not the only double that Goethe saw. Another time he saw his friend Friedrich walking down the street and dressed in Goethe's own dressing gown. Puzzled, the writer went home and found Friedrich there, dressed in the same robe that Goethe saw on the ghost. His friend got caught in the rain and put on a robe while his clothes were drying. Let's move on to another continent and talk about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln spoke openly about his interest in the paranormal, at least in private conversations. From his words, he had some experience in this kind of thing. The night after his first election, he found time to sleep, sitting on the couch. Lying there, actually, he happened to look in the mirror and saw his face. It would not have been unusual if he had not noticed that there were two faces in the mirror. The second Lincoln pale and ghostly, looked at him from the mirror next to his own face. Startled, Lincoln got up from the couch and the doppelganger disappeared. He sat down again to see the double again. Lincoln was amazed, and his wife Mary was horrified. She was sure that the double was a sure sign that Lincoln would be re-elected for the second term. Perhaps because two Lincolns are two terms. But she would not tolerate it because the second Lincoln looked like a dead man. Lincoln continued to repeat the experiment on the couch every night at the same time. He managed to see the double again, and then he stopped showing up. Maybe he, the double, has already delivered his message because Lincoln did not really live to see the end of his second term. Now, Catherine the Great of Russia, our empress, who ruled Russia in the 18th century, was a strong and dangerous person, but strange things happened to her. Two, for example, she saw her ghostly double sitting on her throne. One night when Catherine was lying in bed, worried servants told her that they just saw her enter the throne room. Catherine decided to figure out what was going on and found her double sitting calmly on the throne in the throne room. Catherine immediately ordered the sentries to shoot the impostor. History is silent on whether the bullets harmed the Empress's ghostly double in any way, but soon after, the real Catherine died. I will bring more videos where I will describe her reign and what happened during her reign, but that's a separate subject. She was a fascinating person, a German who loved Russia more than some Russians would, and did so much for the greatness of the country, but at the same time brought so much pain to others. We'll talk about her later. Percy Shelley. The brilliant poet Percy Bysshe Shelley is remembered mainly as the husband of Mary Shelley, who created Frankenstein. Although one might assume that Mary, as a writer in the horror genre, has much more opportunities to see a double, it was Percy who saw him. Shortly before his death in 1812, you see the ship on which Percy traveled, it sank. He confessed to Mary that he had repeatedly met his double. One of these meetings was particularly frightening. Percy went out on a terrace and saw his double, who asked, "And how long will you be happy for?" Oddly enough, their close friend Jane Williams was a witness to the appearance of Percy's double. She often saw Percy pass under her window. The street ended in a dead end, but he never returned. The real Percy was somewhere else at that time. And now Sir Frederick Cairn Rush, a member of the British Parliament, Sir Gilbert Parker, participated in a debate in 1906 and suddenly noticed that another member of Parliament, Sir Frederick Cairn Rush, was sitting next to him. This surprised Sir Gilbert very much because Sir Frederick was seriously ill with the flu at that time. However, he greeted Sir Frederick politely, saying, "I hope you're feeling better." Cairn Rush did not react to this in any way. He just continued to sit with a stony, gloomy expression on his face. When Sir Gilbert looked at him again, soon after, the seat was empty. Baffled, Sir Gilbert began to look for Cairn Rush in the building, but no one saw him leave. When he discussed the event with fellow parliamentarians, it turned out that others had also seen Cairn Rush. When the real Cairn Rush, who was actually at home in bed at the time, found out about what had happened, he was very surprised. He really wanted to take part in the discussion, believing that his spirit had looked into the parliament. His household, however, were terrified and feared that the double was a bad sign. It soon turned out that they were right. For a long time, Cairn Rush's colleagues irritated him when they met, poking at him with their fingers to make sure that he was flesh and blood. In the end, he had to write several sarcastic letters to the local newspaper apologizing for not having the good sense to die to make room for the double, and promised to behave more decently next time around. And now on to the Queen Elizabeth of England. And I'm speaking about Queen Elizabeth I of England, who reigned in the years 1558 to 1603. She was the last ruler of the Tudor dynasty. She was considered a charismatic, balanced, and sensible monarch. She was one of those people who could not be expected to encounter paranormal phenomena. She claimed to have seen her double. According to the Queen, the ghostly Elizabeth lay motionless on her bed, almost like a corpse at the funeral. This was especially remembered by her because such appearances, according to legends, are a sign of imminent death. However, it would be easy to make people forget about this incident if Elizabeth really did not die soon. And now to Maria Agreda. This was a very interesting case. Although doppelgangers are usually considered something sinister, there is evidence that sometimes people can not only control them, but also use them as a kind of second body capable of moving to any place in an instant. In the 17th century, researchers and missionaries in the New World were surprised to find that many tribes in New Mexico already professed Catholicism with full speed, so to say. In response to the question, the Indians said that they were converted to God by a mysterious lady in blue, who taught them everything and even gave them crucifixes and other objects of worship. After a thorough investigation, several priests managed to see the appearance of Maria Agreda, a young Spanish nun. She was wearing a blue robe and claimed that Christianity had taught her to be transported to the Indians across the ocean. Maria never left her monastery and only knew the places she visited were wildlands. However, her words were enough to convince the priests. At first, the Inquisition treated Maria rather suspiciously. She was even accused of witchcraft, but then she was acquitted, perhaps because her story was too good to just give it up. Her abilities began to be attributed to a divine origin. She became an international celebrity, the leader of her monastery, and the author of books about how she gained her abilities. Throughout her life, she changed her mind several times. Sometimes she claimed that she was forced to say that she could easily move her spiritual copy to another continent. Sometimes she said that all this was true. Now, let's go on to the high seas. George Tryon, Vice Admiral George Tryon. For him, the June 22nd of 1893 was not a very good day. He commanded 2 columns of ships off the coast of Syria and gave the command to the columns to turn their noses, so to say, to each other. Such an attempt to perform a majestic naval maneuver turned out to be a stupid mistake, since the first ships almost immediately rammed each other, and one of them, on which Tryon was himself, went down. Tryon died knowing that he just condemned 357 sailors to death. His last words were dignified and said, "It's completely my fault." At the same time, Tryon's wife hosted a party for her friends and their home in London. Unexpectedly, to the surprise of the guests, Tryon appeared at the party. In silence, he went down the stairs, solemnly marched to the living room and opened the door to get out, and then suddenly disappeared. He was dressed in a ceremonial uniform as if he commanded a demonstration inspection of ships. However, there are some inconsistencies in this story. For example, someone says that Lady Tryon was busy with guests at that time and did not see the double, while others claim that she was one of the witnesses. However, the story is similar to the creepy stories of sailors whose doppelgangers inform families of their death. Now on to a very interesting French writer. If you are of strong spirit, you should read his horror stories. I read them in Russian, very interesting ones. His name was Guy de Maupassant. Perhaps the French writer Guy de Maupassant described the closest experience of meeting a double. By the end of his life, he was rumored to be constantly interacting with the double. This creepy double not only talked to the writer, but one day sat down and began dictating a story to him. De Maupassant claimed that one of his last stories was literally written by a ghost. The story, dictated by the spirit of the de Maupassant, titled Ego, tells about a man whose mind slowly gives way to an evil spirit using his body. And, as if echoing the story, Maupassant's mental health began to deteriorate shortly after the story was finished. According to another account, the double did not dictate the story because he disappeared immediately after the terrified de Maupassant called the servant. However, a few months later, the doppelganger returned. He entered the writer's room, looked at him sadly, then sat down and covered his face with his hands, as if in despair. De Maupassant decided that his double brought terrible news, and from that day the writer's life went downhill, and a year later he died in a madhouse. Now Emily Sedgey herself, she has never met her double, but other people have seen him. Sedgey worked in elite schools for girls. She was a wonderful teacher, but for some reason she preferred to constantly change her place of work, of employment. In 16 years, she changed it 19 times, and in 1845, the reasons became known. Sedgey was allegedly the victim of her doppelganger's strange behavior. Her ghostly twin first appeared during class, and 13 schoolgirls saw how the double stood side by side with Sedgey and copied all her movements with mirror precision. The next time the doppelganger appeared behind her back while she was eating and again began to repeat her movements. Sedgey paid absolutely no attention to the ghost, although everyone else saw it quite clearly. However, Sedgey became addicted to drinking and was sometimes almost unconscious when the doppelganger appeared and did strange things at the same time. Sedgey later said that she was thinking about them at that moment and assumed that she might have some subconscious control over the doppelganger. Soon the double stopped appearing in the immediate vicinity of the original. At first, it would walk into a classroom full of students and calmly sit down in a chair, while Sedgey herself was outside and working in the garden. The few who dared to approach the doppelganger found that they could pass through it, but it felt like a dense fabric. Well, time passed and the ghost became a regular guest of the school, and the worried parents of the girls began to take their children out of school. Although Sedgey was the perfect employee, the headmistress had no choice but to fire her, along with the ghostly doppelganger. And now about a magician whose last name was Pinetti. This was one of the most unique cases of conscious creation of doubles on the physical plane that was officially recorded in history. The famous magician Pinetti came to St. Petersburg in Russia in 1800. After demonstrating some tricks of illusionism, the possibilities of hypnosis and parapsychological phenomena, he was invited to appear the next day at noon to the emperor's office to get paid. According to the conditions set for the magician, the guards were ordered not to let anyone into the palace. Even the keys to all entrances to the palace, park, and to the palace itself were placed on the king's table. At 5 minutes to 12, the police department reported that the magician did not leave the house, but at noon, Pinetti showed up at the office for the meeting. "You are a dangerous man," the Emperor Paul remarked. "Only to entertain your majesty," the magician replied. Before leaving, Pinetti warned the emperor that he would leave the city in 15 outposts of the capital at the same time at noon. On the day of the departure, a crowd of onlookers gathered near each of the outposts at noon, and all these people and the police saw Pinetti and the carriage that took him away from the city. His departure was registered at all 15 outposts, and the marks in the passport were made everywhere in full form. This information that I told you, it's mostly from Russian sources, and that means nothing. If there is something to refute it, that's understandable, but there is something out there. There is some phenomena connected to this that we just don't understand, and I am sure There are many other cases that you might know about, or people in China do, of course in India and other places, because we can't just limit everything to European or American experiences. And I'm sure there are people out there who study such phenomena with different aims in their heart. So I'll bring you more such cases and such phenomena too, and you can see my other videos about very interesting so-called psi experiments and time travel and so forth, and some of it may be, all this may be interconnected. What I wanted to let you know is that this is a phenomenon that should be studied more. And if you like my research, please support me. You'll find the ways to do it in the links to this video. Please like my video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.